my sister begged. Please, don't come to my wedding. Why? I asked. She sighed. I don't want people to know you're just a cleaner. My mother added coldly. We'll say you're dead. Never contact us again. I left in tears. On the wedding day, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Calls from my sister, my mother, my relatives. What happened? In the staff room flooded with morning sunlight, Eleanor Foster was adjusting the collar of her uniform. A badge reading Head of Cleaning gleamed on her uniform. She had worked as the leader of the cleaning staff in a San Francisco high-rise business tower for over 10 years. Ms. Eleanor, you're early again this morning, her colleague Maria called out. Eleanor smiled. We have special cleaning on the 26th floor today. It's the Hartwell Corporation's executive boardroom. While checking her cleaning cart, she efficiently handed out work lists to each staff member. The staff working under Eleanor respected her first-class cleaning techniques and thoughtful consideration. She had been recognized as an exemplary staff member 3 times in the past 5 years, and was highly trusted by the building's tenant companies. Everyone, thank you for your hard work today, she said with a smile as she sent the staff off to their respective floors. While heading to the 26th floor, Eleanor checked her mobile phone. There were no messages from her sister Vanessa. Last week she had received a call from her mother announcing Vanessa's engagement, but since then, there had been no direct contact from her sister. Vanessa worked at a famous advertising agency and had recently become engaged to Richard Hartwell, a young executive from a major corporation. Eleanor was proud of her sister's success, but also felt a distance between them. Their relationship had grown increasingly estranged over the years. That evening, Eleanor visited her mother's house. Located in a quiet suburban neighborhood, her mother's house was where she had grown up. Her mother, Margaret, had lost her husband early and raised her 2 daughters as a single mother. However, Margaret had always aspired to high society, and was particularly fixated on her daughters making good marriages. When she opened the front door, Eleanor could hear Vanessa and her mother's voices coming from the living room. The wedding planner will propose 3 designs for the seating chart. Since the Hartwell family's guest list is quite extensive, we need to consider the balance, her mother's voice said. We have to invite everyone Richard's father recommends. There are many corporate connections, Vanessa replied. Eleanor entered the living room. Hello? Her mother and Vanessa turned around with surprised expressions. Wedding preparation documents were spread out on the table. Eleanor, you should have called ahead, her mother said. Her tone carried a hint of irritation. Vanessa stood up and gave Eleanor a light hug. It's been a while. Congratulations on your engagement. Mom told me about it. Eleanor smiled. Is Richard Hartwell from the Hartwell Corporation by any chance? Yes, he's Jonathan Hartwell's only son, Vanessa answered, looking somewhat proud. His father is truly wonderful. Such a gentleman. Eleanor inwardly caught her breath. Jonathan Hartwell was an executive of the main tenant company in the building where she worked. Though she had never met him directly, she knew his name and face. So, when is the wedding? Eleanor asked. The 15th of next month, her mother answered. We're already incredibly busy with preparations. Eleanor paused briefly before saying, I haven't received an invitation yet. When should I expect it? Suddenly, the atmosphere in the room changed. Vanessa and her mother exchanged glances, seemingly hesitant to say something. Well, Eleanor, Vanessa began. Her mother interrupted. About the invitations, we're still considering. What do you mean? Eleanor asked, confused. The Hartwell family is very prestigious, her mother said calmly. In their circle, there are certain expectations. Mom, what are you trying to say? Margaret sighed. To be honest, Eleanor, your occupation is somewhat of an issue. My occupation? Eleanor's voice rose slightly. I take pride in my work. I know. But Vanessa started to say, we've told them, you're the head of the Corporate Facilities Management Division, her mother said. Eleanor was stunned. You lied? It's not a lie, just a change in expression, her mother returned with words that sounded like an excuse. The Hartwells think my sister is? Vanessa stumbled over her words. Margaret finished with a cold voice. We've told them you passed away. We don't want the Hartwell family to know that we have a daughter who's a cleaner. Eleanor was speechless. She felt a pain like her chest was being constricted. This is Vanessa's chance in life. Please understand. Her mother's voice lacked emotion. Eleanor slowly stood up. Feeling a lump in her throat, she simply said, I understand. Before leaving the house, she turned back and said, I'm not ashamed of my job. What's shameful is a mother who denies her own daughter. Eleanor left her mother's house, fighting back tears. On Sunday afternoon, Eleanor was silently wiping the windows of her apartment. She always found peace by immersing herself in the rhythm of cleaning. 3 days had passed since she left her mother's house, but the words spoken then still left a deep wound in her heart. We don't want the Hartwell family to know that we have a daughter who's a cleaner. Looking at her own reflection in the window glass, Eleanor gave a bitter smile. Her small apartment in San Francisco was by no means luxurious, but she was proud of it. It was a place she had earned through honest work. Certificates of recognition for her work as a cleaning staff member were displayed on the walls. The doorbell rang, and Eleanor stopped what she was doing. She hadn't expected any visitors. Looking through the peephole, she saw her mother and Vanessa standing there. Tension shot through Eleanor's chest. With a heavy heart, she opened the door. Her mother merely nodded slightly, but Vanessa spoke with a forcibly cheerful voice. Hello, big sister. Sorry to intrude. Come in, Eleanor said briefly, inviting the two into the living room. Margaret sat on the sofa and looked around the apartment. This place is tidier than when I was here last, she said, but her words carried an implicit criticism. Would you like something to drink? Eleanor asked. No, thank you, her mother answered and got straight to the point. Eleanor, we've come to talk. Eleanor crossed her arms. About what? Vanessa leaned forward. The other day, I couldn't explain properly because it was so sudden. That's why we came today. Explain what? Eleanor said coldly. That I'm supposed to be dead? Her mother cleared her throat. There's no need to get emotional, Eleanor. This is an important decision for Vanessa's future. Vanessa nervously pushed back her hair. She was wearing designer clothes and perfect makeup, in stark contrast to Eleanor's simple jeans and t-shirt. Big sister, I really like Richard, Vanessa said. His family, they're very traditional people. Especially his father, who's very particular about social appearances. Eleanor stared at her sister in silence. Vanessa continued, Please, don't come to the wedding. Why? Eleanor asked quietly. She already knew the answer, but she wanted to hear it from her sister's mouth. Vanessa sighed. I don't want people to know I have a sister who's a cleaner. Those words echoed around the room, followed by silence. Eleanor felt pain deep in her chest, but kept her expression unchanged. Is my job so shameful? Eleanor asked quietly. It's not shameful, Vanessa quickly said. It's just that Richard's family has been elite for generations, and by their standards. Standards? Eleanor's voice rose slightly. I work honestly. I keep offices clean for hundreds of people, maintaining their work environment. Is that shameful? Your work is commendable, Eleanor, her mother interjected. But face reality. The Hartwells are a prominent family in San Francisco. Being associated with them will raise the social status of not just Vanessa, but our entire family. Eleanor looked at her mother in disbelief. Social status? Is that what matters to you? Enough to deny your own daughter? Eleanor. Her mother's voice grew cold. This is Vanessa's chance in life. Don't ruin it with your ego. Ego? Eleanor said, suppressing her anger. Wanting to be recognized as family is ego? Vanessa, with tears in her eyes, pleaded, Please, understand. Richard's father looked into my family background in detail. I don't want to lose him. Despite the pain in her chest, Eleanor calmly asked, So, what did you tell the Hartwell family, Mom? After a moment of silence, her mother answered, I've already told the Hartwell family that you died in an accident 10 years ago. Eleanor gasped in shock. 10 years ago? A car accident, her mother said matter-of-factly. It was a sad event, but we've moved on. Eleanor was at a loss for words. To think her existence could be erased so easily. Sister, Vanessa pleaded, please don't contact the family anymore. Don't come to the wedding. For just 2 weeks, pretend you don't exist for us. Eleanor slowly stood up. There were tears in her eyes, but her voice remained calm. I can't believe a family would be ashamed of their own daughter, Eleanor said. I've always taken pride in my work. I wake up early every day to work so others can have a comfortable environment. There's no reason to be ashamed of that. Eleanor? Her mother began. Your lies will come back to haunt you one day, Eleanor said, looking at her mother and sister. What kind of future can a relationship built on lies have? Please leave, Eleanor said quietly. Don't come back again. Her mother and Vanessa started to make excuses, but they left the apartment, seemingly pushed away by Eleanor's cold gaze. As the door closed, Eleanor's knees gave way. She collapsed onto the sofa, and emotions she had held in for years poured out like a flood. She cried. The pain of being rejected by her family, the frustration of having her life and work denied, all flowed out in large tears. The sunset coming through the window made her tears shine golden. Eleanor looked at her certificates of recognition. I'm not wrong, she told herself. 1 week before the wedding, San Francisco's morning was shrouded in fog. Eleanor arrived at Hartwell Tower earlier than usual, and was checking the final details of the day's work in the staff room. Today was a special day. The annual deep cleaning of each floor in the building was scheduled, and all cleaning staff were mobilized. Everyone, let's start with Building B today. Eleanor gave instructions to about 20 staff members. Pay extra attention to the executive floors. I hear the Hartwell Corporation has a board meeting the day after tomorrow. While the staff headed to their assigned floors, Eleanor was checking the work list on her tablet. Recently, she had immersed herself in work to avoid thinking about her family. 5 days had passed since the confrontation in her apartment, but the memory remained vivid in her heart. At 10 a.m., Eleanor was working on the 26th floor, the executive level. While carefully wiping the large windows, she turned her gaze to the view of the city visible through the windows. The sun was beginning to peek through the clouds beyond San Francisco Bay. A magnificent view, isn't it? Startled by a voice from behind, Eleanor turned around. There stood a man in an expensive suit. She immediately recognized who he was, Jonathan Hartwell, the owner of the building and the father of Vanessa's fiancé, Richard. Mr. Hartwell. Eleanor bowed politely. Good morning. Good morning. Jonathan smiled gently. Thank you for working so early in the morning. Eleanor maintained her composure. It's our job. Especially today, as it's the annual deep cleaning day. Jonathan looked at her with interest. Are you responsible for this floor? I'm very grateful that it's always kept so clean. Thank you, Eleanor said. I serve as the head of cleaning for this building. Miss Foster, Jonathan said, looking at her name tag. I heard you've been working here for over 10 years. The management speaks very highly of you. Eleanor was a bit surprised. She hadn't expected someone of his stature to know about an ordinary cleaning staff member. Yes, I love this job. That's the most important thing, Jonathan said, gazing out the window. I also started with cleaning when I was young. At my father's small company, I started with floor cleaning. Eleanor felt her tension ease a little. And now, yes, now I own this building. Jonathan laughed. That's why I appreciate honest workers like you. He suddenly changed the subject. Actually, my son is getting married next week. Eleanor's heart began to race. Congratulations, she managed to say with as much composure as possible. Thank you. His fiancée is a lovely young woman. She's the youngest daughter of the Foster family, Jonathan said. Are you related to the Fosters in any way? Eleanor hesitated for a moment. No, it's just a coincidence that we share the same last name. I see, Jonathan said curiously. I heard she had a sister, but unfortunately she died in an accident 10 years ago. Eleanor felt a pain in her chest. Is that so? Yes. When Richard heard about it, he told me, I wish her sister were still alive so I could invite her. Family is important after all. Eleanor was at a loss for words. She felt guilty about continuing to lie to Jonathan, who seemed sincere. However, if she told the truth now, it might affect her sister's marriage. I'm sorry for interrupting your work, Jonathan smiled and said. Please continue. I hope we have a chance to talk again sometime. Eleanor nodded silently. Even after Jonathan had left, her heart remained in turmoil. On the morning of the wedding day, Eleanor decided to spend her day off alone. The cloudy sky visible from her apartment window seemed to match her mood. She sat on the sofa with a cup of coffee in hand, trying to read a book. However, her thoughts constantly drifted to the wedding. They must be starting the preparations by now, she thought. The wedding was to be held at a luxury hotel in the city. Her mother and Vanessa were probably relieved that she wasn't there. Suddenly, her mobile phone began to ring. Eleanor ignored it. However, the calls didn't stop. coming one after another. Looking at the screen, she saw a history of calls from her sister, mother, and even unknown numbers. What's happening? Eleanor began to worry. The phone rang again, this time from Vanessa. Eleanor took a deep breath and answered. Eleanor? Vanessa's crying voice resonated. Where are you? At home, Eleanor answered calmly. What's wrong? Please, come to the wedding venue right now. Vanessa's voice was urgent. Everything is falling apart. Eleanor was confused. Why me? You're the ones who pretended I was dead. Richard's father, Vanessa said, crying. He knows about you. He says he met you at the company last week. Eleanor's heart nearly stopped. Jonathan Hartwell? Yes. He's angry that we lied. He says he holds you in high regard. Richard is furious too. The wedding might be cancelled. In Eleanor's mind, the conversation with Jonathan last week came flooding back. Perhaps he had sensed something then. Please, Eleanor, Vanessa begged through her tears. Help me. You're my sister. Eleanor gave a sardonic smile. Until just now, I was your deceased sister. I'm sorry. Vanessa's voice trembled. I'm truly sorry. I was wrong then. I need you now. From the other end of the line, other voices could be heard. Her mother seemed to be shouting something. Mr. Hartwell says, Vanessa continued, that you're the most trusted head of cleaning at the company and a family member to be proud of. He says we're the problem for lying. Eleanor sat down in her chair. He said that? Yes. He's saying, a family that values honesty and diligence cannot accept liars. Richard is starting to distrust me too. Vanessa continued to cry. Please, come. Explain everything. Eleanor was speechless. Ironically, the pride she had taken in her work for years was now the key to saving her family. She looked out the window. The sun was beginning to peek through the clouds. Where is the ceremony being held? Eleanor finally spoke. Hope lit up in Vanessa's voice. At the Fairmont Hotel. The ceremony was supposed to start in an hour. All right, Eleanor said, but I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for the truth. After hanging up, Eleanor opened her closet. There hung an elegant dress she had bought months ago for a friend's wedding but had never worn. Eleanor took a deep breath in the back seat of the taxi. Outside the window she could see the majestic Fairmont Hotel, an iconic presence in San Francisco. The historic white building gleamed at the top of Nob Hill. Please drop me off here, she told the driver. As she stepped out of the taxi, Eleanor's heart was filled with complex emotions. She was wearing a navy blue silk dress that she had pulled from the back of her closet, and she had styled her hair more meticulously than usual. Despite her confident appearance, she was filled with anxiety inside. At the hotel entrance, she took out her cell phone and called her longtime friend Sophia. What's wrong, Eleanor? Sophia's voice sounded concerned. I'm in front of the wedding venue, Eleanor said in a trembling voice. But I can't find the courage to enter. Considering how your family treated you, that's understandable, Sophia said. But remember, Eleanor, you take pride in your work. You're a respectable person. Don't lose yourself for your sister's or mother's vanity. Thank you, Eleanor smiled. I'm going in now. She hung up and stepped into the hotel lobby. Magnificent chandeliers sparkled from the ceiling, and the marble floor echoed her footsteps. When she asked at the reception desk where the wedding was being held, she was directed to the grand ballroom. As Eleanor approached the ballroom, there was a palpable tension in the air. Outside the doors, several guests were whispering to each other, wearing confused expressions. As she approached, their conversation stopped. Excuse me, Eleanor addressed an elderly woman. Is this the Foster Hartwell wedding? Yes, it is. But the woman stared at her. You are Eleanor Foster. I'm the bride's sister. The woman's eyes widened. Oh my, you are. She swallowed her words. There seems to be some issue inside. The ceremony might be postponed. Eleanor nodded and headed toward the doors. When she opened them, she saw her mother, Margaret, and Vanessa in distress in the center of the vast ballroom. Vanessa was in her wedding dress, her eyes red and swollen from crying. Her mother was wearing an elegant dress that belied her age, but her expression was stern. On the opposite side of the room, Richard and his family were gathered. Jonathan Hartwell was also visible. He wore a strict expression and was saying something to his son. When Eleanor entered the ballroom, her mother was the first to notice her. Eleanor? Margaret cried out in a voice mixed with surprise and anger. At her voice, Vanessa turned around. Big sister. Her voice was a mixture of relief and fear. The two rushed toward Eleanor and immediately whispered, "Why did you come? You'll only make things worse." "You called me," Eleanor replied calmly. "But it might be too late," Vanessa said with a face on the verge of tears. "Richard's family, they're angry that we lied." Margaret grabbed Eleanor's arm. "You're going to ruin everything. Leave immediately." Eleanor gently shook off her mother's hand. "I'm not running away anymore. It's time to face the truth." With a determined attitude, she headed toward the Hartwell family. When Jonathan saw her, his expression changed from surprise to a gentle smile. "Miss Foster," he approached her and said, "So you were alive after all." Richard and his mother also turned around. Richard looked at her with a confused expression. "Mr. Jonathan," Eleanor said in a calm voice, "it's an honor to meet you. Thank you for the other day." "I don't understand why your family tried to hide you," Jonathan said frankly. Eleanor took a deep breath. "I'll tell you the truth." Her voice echoed throughout the room. "I serve as the leader of the cleaning staff at Hartwell Tower. I take pride in my work, but my family felt differently. They were ashamed of my profession and pretended I was dead." The room fell silent. Richard looked at Vanessa with a surprised expression. Vanessa looked down, seemingly at a loss for words. "For 10 years I've worked at Hartwell Tower every day, maintaining the environment of your company," Eleanor continued. "I was very honored to learn the other day that you appreciated my work." Jonathan nodded. "You are one of the most valued employees in our company. Why was there a need to hide that?" Richard stepped forward. He was a handsome man with an intelligent impression. "I'm disappointed that my fiancé's family lied to me," he said, looking at Vanessa. "But I appreciate your sister's honesty and pride." Jonathan looked sternly toward the Foster family. "We Hartwells value honesty and diligence above all. We cannot ally ourselves with a family that lies." Margaret stepped forward with a pale face. "Mr. Jonathan, please consider my daughter." "Mom," Eleanor quietly interrupted Margaret, "let's stop the lies." She turned toward Vanessa. Her sister was looking up at her with a tear-stained face. "Vanessa," Eleanor said gently, "I don't intend to ruin my sister's happiness, but there's no future in a relationship built on lies. Richard seems like a wonderful person. Why don't you be honest with him?" Vanessa covered her face with trembling hands. After a while she turned back to Richard. "I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry. I was embarrassed." "What were you embarrassed about?" Richard asked quietly. "Social status, money," Vanessa said in a small voice. "I was worried whether my family would measure up to yours." "I never cared about that," Richard said. "I fell in love with you, not your background or family." After a moment of silence, Jonathan spoke. "Our family was working class until 3 generations ago. My grandfather was a factory worker. We achieved our current position through honest labor and diligence." He turned to Eleanor. "It's proud workers like you whom I respect." Margaret raised her face. For the first time there was a hint of shame in her eyes. "I was wrong," she strained to say. "To be ashamed of my daughter's work. I failed as a mother." Eleanor was surprised by her mother's change. For years, her mother had been ashamed of her profession, but now she was acknowledging her mistake. Richard took Vanessa's hand. "Today's wedding will be postponed, but this isn't the end. We have a chance to start again, with honesty." Vanessa nodded tearfully. "Thank you." Eleanor felt her heart lighten at this development. "Truth sometimes brings pain, but it leads us to true happiness," she said quietly. 6 months later, at dusk in San Francisco, Eleanor's apartment living room was filled with warm light. Elaborate dishes were set on the table, and wine poured into glasses gleamed in the sunset. "Let's toast." Eleanor raised her glass. To new beginnings. Surrounding her, her mother Margaret, sister Vanessa and Richard clinked their glasses together. "To new beginnings," everyone said in unison. Much had changed since that day. Richard and Vanessa had postponed their wedding and decided to receive counseling, to rebuild their relationship on truth, not lies. "Big sister, today's food is delicious," Vanessa said with a smile. The vanity in her eyes was gone, replaced by genuine warmth. "It's a recipe Vanessa taught me," Eleanor replied. "I'm rediscovering my sister's talents." The two laughed together. Rebuilding their sisterly relationship hadn't been easy, but through weekly meals and honest dialogue, they were gradually regaining their bond. "Eleanor," Margaret said quietly, "after visiting your workplace last week, my eyes were truly opened." Eleanor was surprised. "You really came?" "Yes," Margaret nodded. "For the first time I understood how important the work your team does is. I felt proud seeing how your staff respects you." Tears welled up in Margaret's eyes. "For years I was bound by the wrong values. Pursuing a facade of status, I lost sight of what was truly important." Richard lightly raised his glass. "Eleanor, thanks to you we've learned a lot, especially about the value of honesty." "How is Jonathan?" Eleanor asked Richard. "Dad has had a lot to think about too," Richard laughed. "He was really impressed by your work ethic, and now he started a program to improve conditions for all cleaning staff in the company. Eleanor smiled. I've changed too. I've become the deputy head of the facilities management division at Hartwell Tower. Really? Vanessa exclaimed joyfully. Congratulations, Mr. Jonathan recommended me, Eleanor said, looking embarrassed. But I still go out in the field sometimes. Because I love the cleaning work. Margaret stood up and walked to the window. I've changed too. Free from my obsession with high society, I've now started a volunteer program supporting single mothers in the community. The twilight light softly illuminated her face. I've learned to value true values over the appearance of status. At the end of the meal, Eleanor took out a cream-colored envelope from a bundle of mail. This arrived, she handed it to Vanessa. Vanessa opened the envelope, looked at the contents, and smiled. It's the invitation to our new wedding. She handed it to Eleanor. Written in beautiful script on the invitation were the words, "We invite the proud sister, Eleanor Foster, to the wedding of Vanessa Foster and Richard Hartwell." Tears welled up in Eleanor's eyes. Truth sometimes brings pain, but it leads us to true happiness. Outside the window, the night view of San Francisco began to sparkle.